So about day before yesterday, I was playing some Osu, clicking on circles like I usually do, and I had my cup of coffee here. I was taking some drinks, and then I accidentally spilled some on my gaming mouse. And so I noticed there was a bit of coffee here, a bit of coffee on the other button, and some of it got in the wheel well. So I wiped it down, and then I went back to clicking on circles, and I was in the middle of a song, and the mouse just turned off completely, and couldn't move my cursor or anything. So I unplugged it, plugged it back in. That happened a couple more times until I decided to open it up and take a look inside. And by then, all the water had evaporated out of the inside. So I put it back together. I was playing a song, and to be specific, if we switch back to my desktop, I was playing this song right here called Hollowness. It's a jump map. And so I was just playing it, and I noticed that the mouse felt quite a bit more sensitive than it normally did. Or at least I was trying to aim, and the cursor was ahead of where I thought it would be. So I'll just skip ahead to a harder part of the song so you can see like how crazy this song gets. So here's a pretty fast part of the song, and it's got a not too good at playing while I'm talking, but it's got like a ton of jumps. So you need very precise aim. It's a great song. I recommend it. Anyway, I finished. I went to class because I had to go to my class, and then when I came back, I played more Osu, and I played some Minecraft. And in addition to Osu, of course, the cursor felt like it was before, or it was like ahead of where it was supposed to be. In Minecraft, my view looked like it was in front of where it was supposed to be, and that was like messing with my head or something. I don't know. Like I was starting to get like a slight headache or eye strain from it. I had my roommate try it, and he thought it was fine. But the first thing I did after that is I went to my school's media center place, and I got this fancy camera. I can only really show it to you head on. But I got this fancy camera to actually measure the latencies. So I'll show you what measurements I got from that. Okay, so back on my desktop, you can see I have some recordings right here from the high-speed camera. So I used Kden Live, and I think it was number 16, but I could be wrong. Yeah, that's 3 hours, 18 minutes. So I got that clip, and I lift the gamma so that you can actually see it. And then you have to figure out where I hit it with my butter knife. I think right there. Okay, so if we make this bigger so we can like see everything, and then we go frame by frame until we see the mouse move. There, okay. So that looks like the frame that it moved. Right there, that's the first frame it moved. So the frame before it moved was something 15. So I wrote that down in my long list of 100 different samples that I took. And so then after that, well, this next frame, the arrow keys are not working. Okay, so this next frame, the one where the mouse started to move, I counted as frame 0, because that means that if the cursor moved at the same time, that it would be 0 milliseconds of latency. So then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and at number 5 you can see movement. So that means that the latency at that spot was 5 milliseconds. And if we look, the best one I found was at 45:017. So if we look for that, 14, 15, 16, 17. So then the next frame, as you can see, that didn't move, but then the next frame it like moved forward a bunch. So that's frame 0, 1, 2. And you can see right there that the mouse gets or the cursor gets noticeably darker. So I counted that as the screen being updated. So that was 2 milliseconds and that was the fastest I recorded. I also recorded 2 milliseconds a couple other times, but this is like the best example of that happening. I also found some tears, which is like just screen tearing, which I thought was kind of cool. So there it moves, and then it got cut in half, so the bottom moved, and so I just recorded that as, I think this frame right here is when I noticed that it got split. So after gathering all the data and putting it in this and modifying it with a Python script, I just used that to quickly read through and calculate the average latencies and like the frequency of how many frames it took. I used that to calculate the latency because it was a 600 FPS camera, and then the percentage of times that I recorded that value. So the average number of frames that it took was 5.4 frames, and the average latency was 9 milliseconds. So in a separate Google Word document, a Microsoft Word document, I guess, I wrote down a bunch of calculations as to how long it should take. So I was taking into account the polling rate of the mouse and the amount of time that it takes to render each frame, and the interaction between the refresh rate of the frames versus the refresh rate of the mouse, and a bunch of other stuff. And I calculated that it should be 8.583 plus or minus 3.583 milliseconds until the screen gets updated from the mouse moving. And so that's a little bit less than 9, so that's 0.417 milliseconds, and this is including the length of time that the mouse should take. I should mention that I was looking at this review of my mouse, which is the Model O Wireless, and it said that there should be about 0.5 to 3.5 milliseconds of motion delay, and it says that the motion delay will be higher during the first about 100 milliseconds of the motion. So that would be 3.5 milliseconds. So I added that, and that's where I got that number. And so that would mean that everything else on my system, all the other latencies of having like only PCIe 3.0 and a really old graphics card, would add up to 0.417 milliseconds. And I thought that sounded pretty unrealistic. But then also on top of that, that lowest latency time was 2 frames, which would mean that it had a latency of 3.3 repeating milliseconds. And so considering that my mouse would in theory have a latency of 3.5 milliseconds if it was normal, before I spilled coffee on it, then that's already lower than it should be. But then you also add the 1 millisecond that it takes to render the frame and the 1 millisecond for the monitor's response time. That means that my mouse is a lot faster than it's supposed to be. So I have proven that my mouse is genuinely faster than what should be physically possible for a Model O Wireless. So then what I did is I contacted the guy who made that review, and I brought up the idea of sending him the mouse so that he could measure some latency data on it. But he said that shipping would cost a lot, and he actually told me about a program called Mouse Comparator that you can just run to get a bunch of latency data. Like you'll get these graphs right here and that graph. So I tested that out by taping my mouse to another mouse. And so I was running some experiments on that. And if we open up this, here I have all the data. So the graphs looked kind of like this. And you can see the blue is my Model O Wireless, and the red is the whatever mouse that was, the S101-3, like Red Dragon or whatever. So as you can see, my Model O Wireless was actually responding earlier than that other mouse. And so we don't actually know how much latency the Red Dragon S101-3 is supposed to have. So we don't actually know if this is good or not. But considering that you can get a mouse and keyboard that mouse along with a keyboard for only $36 on Amazon right now. There's some sort of discount. It probably means that they didn't put in firmware to soften the acceleration curve, to smooth out the curve of data. So I get the feeling that, considering that it's like right on the curve compared to what is supposed to be like this, that probably means that my mouse does not have any latency due to smoothing. So what I'm pretty sure happened was that whenever I spilled coffee on my mouse, it knocked out the motion smoothing system on my mouse, but left everything else intact. And so the mouse somehow was able to keep working without motion delay, and that means lower latency. So pretty sure by spilling coffee on my gaming mouse, I accidentally decreased the latency. This doesn't mean that you should buy a Model O wireless and spill coffee on it, though. Odds are you'll just break your Model O wireless, but what this does mean is that there should be some way to open up the Model O wireless, sort something out, and decrease the latency on any Model O wireless. I don't know how, but that should be, in theory, possible to do on the Model O wireless.